Good morning, YouTube. I hope you've all been doing well. It's Wednesday, September 20th, 2017. I apologize for not making a video for the past few days. I know I'm not actually under any obligation to put out content on a schedule, but I do like keeping a schedule. Okay, so today I want to cover a topic that we would have covered yesterday had I not been feeling dysfunctional, which is extensions and intentions. I'm working through a part of the Less Wrong sequences called A Human's Guide to Words, which I think is a very good and important first step to unpacking the concepts that we discuss. If you want to read ahead or follow along, a link to that specific section of the sequences will be provided in the video description. Let's start with asking what seems to be a simple question. What is red? Well, red is a color. Okay, but what's a color? A color is a property of a thing. Okay, but what's a thing and what's a property? You very quickly go down this rabbit hole of words connected to other words, all using each other to define themselves in this confusing mess. Alternatively, if you ask me what is red, I could point to a bunch of red objects. Red, red, red. The way that parents teach words and concepts to children in the first place. So this is the difference between intentions and extensions. To give an intentional definition is to define a word or phrase in terms of other words, as a dictionary does. To give an extensional definition is to point to examples, as adults do in teaching children. My last sentence was an intentional definition of extensional definition, which makes it an extensional example of intentional definition. If that confused you a bit, let's try a bit of a different example. This one comes to us courtesy of Charles Sanders Peirce. He writes, "If you look into a textbook of chemistry for a definition of lithium, you may be told that it is the element whose atomic weight is 7, very nearly. But if the author has a more logical mind, he will tell you that if you search among minerals that are vitreous, translucent, gray, or white, very hard, brittle, and insoluble, for one which imparts a crimson tinge to an unluminous flame, this mineral being triturated with lime or witherite ratsbane, and then fused, can be partly dissolved in muriatic acid, and this solution evaporated, and the residue be extracted with sulfuric acid and duly purified, it can be converted by ordinary methods into chloride, which, being obtained in the solid state, fused and electrolyzed with half a dozen powerful cells, will yield a globule of pinkish silvery metal that will float on gasoline, and the material of that is a specimen of lithium." Let's think about that a bit. Peirce isn't literally showing you a chunk of lithium. There's not a piece of lithium stapled to the inside of the book to point to. Instead, he's giving you what essentially amounts to a treasure map, an intentionally defined procedure which, when executed, will lead you to an extensional example of lithium. This is different from tossing you a hunk of lithium and saying this is lithium, but it's also different from saying atomic weight 7. So that's an intentional and extensional definition. It's a way of telling someone what you mean by a concept. When I talked about communicating definitions, I was talking about communicating concepts, telling someone what you mean when you use the word red, or human, or lithium, or tiger. So now let's talk about the concepts themselves. The actual intention of my tiger concept would be the neural pattern in my temporal cortex that inspects an incoming signal from the visual cortex to determine whether or not that signal contains a tiger. The actual extension of my tiger concept is everything I call a tiger. Intentional definitions don't and can't capture entire intentions. Extensional definitions don't capture entire extensions. If I point to just one tiger and say the word tiger, the communication may fail if they think I mean dangerous animal, or male tiger, or yellow thing. Similarly, if I say dangerous yellow-black striped animal without pointing to anything, the listener may visualize giant hornets. You can't capture in words all the details of the cognitive concept as it exists in your mind that lets you recognize things as tigers or non-tigers. It's too big. You can't point to all the things you've already seen that you called a tiger in the past, let alone everything that you would call a tiger. For any simple definition you can come up with, there will be outliers and edge cases that don't fit neatly into that definition. Where exactly does Hobbes of Calvin and Hobbes fame fit in with the regular definition of a tiger? This makes it hard to change the meanings of words and is the reason we can't just define words however we like. Because while we can make up whatever intention string we want, we can't actually program the concept that we have into someone's mind. Not perfectly, and not the whole thing. We can get far enough along that it seems like the collection of phonemes making the tiger sound in English is representative of comic book characters and stuffed animals, but you'd be hard-pressed to define that concept broadly enough to include those things while still being useful and meaningful in everyday language. The strongest definitions use a crossfire of intentional and extensional communication to nail down a concept. Even so, you're only communicating maps to concepts or instructions for building concepts. You don't communicate the actual categories as they exist in your mind or in the world. Even if we pull an Aristotle and pretend that the definitions are the actual concepts, you still don't have simultaneous freedom of intention and extension. Suppose I define Mars as a huge red rocky sphere around a tenth of the Earth's mass and 50% further away from the Sun. It's a separate issue at that point to show that this intentional definition I just gave actually matches some particular extensional thing in my experience, or indeed anything in the real world at all. If I instead say that that's Mars and point to a red light in the night sky, it becomes a separate matter to show that this extensional light matches any particular intentional definition I may propose, or any intentional beliefs I may have, such as Mars is the god of war. But most of the brain's work of applying intentions happens without our deliberate awareness. We aren't consciously aware that our identification of a red light in the sky as Mars is a separate matter from our verbal definition, Mars is the god of war. No matter what kind of intentional definition I make up to describe Mars, my mind still believes that Mars refers to this thingy and that it's the fourth planet in the solar system. We'll be covering this more later, but this video is already getting sort of long, so let's end it there. To recap, to define something extensionally is to point to an example, and to define something intentionally is to give a definition with respect to other words. This is important for stuff we'll be building on later, and is at the core of a lot of the problems in our current cultural and political discourse. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to help support my content creation, I have a Patreon set up, and since I don't make much money, I do really appreciate all the contributions I can get. Links to that, along with my Twitter and blog and Discord server, will be in the video description. Take care, YouTube. I'll see you tomorrow.